This is the story of Donna Lass.
The Vanishing Nurse of Lake Tahoe, The Disappearance of Donna Lass. Cold Open, a casino town on the edge of a mountain lake. September 1970. A 25-year-old nurse finishes her overnight shift just after 2 in the morning. She signs the logbook for the last time. She walks out into the dark. She is never confirmed seen again. For 53 years, nobody knew if Donna Lass was alive or dead. Her brand new car sat parked outside her apartment, gathering dust, season after season. Her clothes still hung in the closet, exactly where she'd left them. Her bank account sat untouched, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, like a clock that had simply stopped. And within a single day of her vanishing, a man none of her family or co-workers had ever heard of picked up a payphone and made 2 calls. He told her boss she'd had a family emergency. He told her landlord the same thing. He said she'd gone home. It was a lie. There was no emergency. There was no trip home. There was, for half a century, nothing at all. Just silence, stretching out in every direction. This case has haunted homicide detectives and amateur codebreakers alike for 2 generations now. Part of that is the disappearance itself. The cover story, the untouched belongings, the sheer completeness of the vanishing. But part of it is something else entirely. Who Donna Lass might have crossed paths with right before she disappeared. A killer who was, at that exact moment, terrorizing Northern California. A killer taunting police in cipher. A killer mailing the press cryptic postcards that hinted at victims nobody could ever identify. Whether that connection is real has never been settled, and we're going to walk through exactly why, honestly, carefully, without pretending this case is more solved than it actually is. Here's what is real, what is confirmed. In December of 2023, a human skull that had sat in a coroner's storage room for 37 years was finally given a name. This is the story of how Donna Lass disappeared. It's the story of an investigation that went cold for half a century, and it's the story of the question that still isn't answered, even now, even after she's finally been found. Chapter 1. Who was Donna Lass? Let's start at the beginning, because to understand what was lost, you have to understand who she was before any of this happened. It's tempting, with cases like this, to skip straight to the disappearance, to treat the missing person almost like a placeholder, a name attached to a mystery, rather than an actual person who got up every morning, who had favorite songs, who probably complained about the weather and laughed at things that weren't even that funny. But Donna Lass deserves more than that. She deserves to be remembered as a person first, long before she became a case file. Donna Ann Lass was born on November 3, 1944. Her father, James Lass, was a farmer. Her mother was named Frances. She grew up in and around Beresford, South Dakota, a small farming town tucked into the southeastern corner of the state. Picture it. Green elevators rising up out of flat farmland, church suppers on Sunday afternoons, a single main street where everybody knows everybody. That was Donna's childhood. She graduated from Beresford High School in 1962. We don't have a detailed public record of her early adult years. The gap between high school graduation and her arrival in California is mostly blank in the historical record. But by her mid to late 20s, Donna Lass had become a registered nurse. And it's worth pausing here, because in the late 1960s, that credential meant something specific for a young woman from a small Midwestern farm town. It meant genuine professional independence. It meant a portable skill set, something she could carry with her city to city, state to state, without having to wait for anyone's permission. It meant a credential that could take her almost anywhere in the country, at a time when a lot of doors were still closed to women who wanted that kind of mobility. Nursing was one of the few professions that let a woman like Donna build a life entirely on her own terms. And that independence is going to matter again later in this story, because it's part of why almost nobody around her thought anything was wrong when she suddenly seemed to vanish from her usual routines. Young, independent women moving on without much warning wasn't treated as unusual. It was, in a strange way, almost expected. At one point in her career, her work took her to Napa State Hospital in California, a large psychiatric institution just north of San Francisco. And if you know anything about state mental health facilities in that era, you know what that job actually meant day to day. Understaffed wards, difficult, sometimes dangerous patients, long shifts that bled into each other, where you learn to read a room and a person fast, because your own safety and the safety of the people around you often depended on it. It's the kind of clinical environment that builds resilience fast, because it has to. There's no easing into a job like that, and no real way to fake your way through it either. You either develop the instincts for it, or you didn't last. Whatever Donna Lass was like by the time she left Napa State Hospital, she was almost certainly not a naive or sheltered young woman. She had already spent real time around crisis, around unpredictability, around the kind of work that teaches you quickly how to stay calm when things go sideways. That matters because it pushes back against any narrative that frames her as simply careless or unworldly. Whatever ultimately happened to her, it does not appear to have happened to someone who was easily fooled. By the spring of 1970, Donna Lass was ready for a change of scenery. And in May of that year, she made the move to South Lake Tahoe. Now, it's worth taking a moment here, slowing down, really picturing what that move actually meant. Because the Lake Tahoe that Donna Lass arrived in wasn't some quiet alpine backwater. It was a very specific place at a very specific cultural moment. By 1970, the casinos lining the Nevada side of the state line, places like the Sahara Tahoe, Harvey's, Harrah's, had completely transformed what used to be a sleepy mountain retreat into a genuine entertainment destination. Headliners performed in the showrooms, big names, the kind of acts that drew people up the mountain just for a weekend, just to say they'd seen the show. Tourists and gamblers poured into the basin year-round, drawn in winter by the skiing and in summer by the lake itself, that impossibly blue water ringed by pine forests and granite peaks, the kind of view that stops people mid-sentence the first time they see it. And running parallel to all of that glamour, underneath it really, holding the whole thing up, was an entire economy of young transient workers, dealers, waitresses, ski instructors, bellhops, and yes, nurses, young people who'd moved to the basin chasing tips, chasing mountain air, chasing a faster, freer pace of life than wherever they'd come from. It was a town built, in large part, on people who weren't from there, which made it a place where a new face barely registered and where a familiar face suddenly disappearing didn't necessarily register either, at least not right away. Donna Lass fit that profile almost exactly. She took a position staffing the first aid station at the Sahara Tahoe, a resort casino just over the state line in State Line, Nevada. It was steady, structured work, in a building that, by the nature of a casino, never really closed. Her job was to patch up minor injuries among gamblers and skiers, twisted ankles, cut hands, the occasional case of someone who'd had one too many at the blackjack table and needed somewhere quiet to sit down. She handled the occasional real medical emergency too, a cardiac scare on the gaming floor, an allergic reaction in a restaurant booth, the kinds of things that happen when you put thousands of strangers under one roof around the clock for years on end. And she worked overnight shifts, those strange suspended hours inside a casino at 2 in the morning, when the gaming floor is still loud, still lit up, still buzzing with noise and motion, and the clatter of slot machines, but the rest of the world outside has gone completely dark and silent. It's an unusual kind of solitude, working that shift. You're surrounded by people, and yet, in a sense, completely alone, tucked away in a small first aid room, while an entire artificial daytime carries on just outside the door. By early September, 4 months into her new life, she was settling in for real. She signed a lease on a new apartment in State Line, close enough to the casino to walk, or to make the drive in just a few minutes. She bought a brand new car. She was, by every available account, building towards something, not running from anything. And that detail matters more than it might seem to at first listen, because it's the very first thing that separates Donna Lass's case from so many disappearances that turn out eventually to have a quiet, explainable cause. There was no warning sign anyone has ever pointed to, no documented argument with a partner, no reported financial trouble, no note left behind, no emptied bank account, no packed suitcase, no goodbye phone calls home to South Dakota, preparing her family for the idea that she might vanish. Compare that, for a moment, to how most adult disappearances actually unfold. Most of the time, when an adult vanishes, there's at least some thread to pull, a relationship falling apart, a debt collector circling, a pattern of someone talking about wanting to start over somewhere new. Investigators look for those threads first, because most of the time, that's exactly where the explanation is hiding. With Donna Lass, there was nothing like that, no thread, just a life that, by every visible measure, was getting better. She had just started paying rent on a brand new home. 4 days later, she was gone. Chapter 2. The Last Night. The early hours of Sunday, September 6, 1970, began like any other overnight shift at the Sahara Tahoe's first aid station. Donna Lass made her final entry in the nurse's logbook at 1:50 a.m. By every account that survived, it was a routine note. Nothing urgent, nothing that suggested anything was wrong, nothing that would have raised an eyebrow if you'd read it the next morning, just a nurse doing her job in the small, quiet hours of a casino at the edge of night. whatever that entry actually said, and the exact wording hasn't survived in any detail that's been made public. It was, by all appearances, completely unremarkable. A line in a logbook written by someone who had no idea it would become the last confirmed trace of her handwriting that anyone would ever examine. What happened immediately after that entry has never been definitively established. Think about that for a second. No coworker has ever come forward, not in 55 years, with a confirmed account of physically watching her walk out of that building that night. Casinos in 1970 weren't blanketed in security cameras the way they are today. There was no digital trail, no badge swipe, no time-stamped footage of her stepping through a door. She made her last note, and then, as far as the historical record is concerned, she simply stops existing in anyone's direct memory. What we do know is this. Her car, the new car she'd recently bought, was later found parked at her apartment complex in State Line. So whatever happened, she made it home that night. Or at least her car did. The following day, Monday, September 7th, a contemporary local news account places her near her apartment one more time, walking, in the company of a young man with blonde hair. No name has ever been attached to him, no license plate was recorded, no clear photograph exists anywhere. It's a brief second-hand description, almost an afterthought in whatever article originally mentioned it, probably written by someone who had no reason at the time to think it mattered. And it has haunted this case for over 50 years, because nobody has ever been able to say who that man was, whether he had anything to do with what happened next, or whether he was simply a passerby. Someone who has no idea, to this day, that he became a permanent, unsolved fixture inside one of America's most enduring disappearances. It could be someone's grandfather now, sitting at a kitchen table somewhere, with absolutely no idea his space, or at least the memory of his space, has been the subject of speculation for over 5 decades. After that sighting, there is nothing. No further confirmed sightings, no more calls home, no trace. It's as if the timeline of Donna Lass's life simply runs out of road. And here's where the case takes its strangest and arguably most important turn, not in what didn't happen, but in what did. The day after Lass was last seen, an unknown man placed 2 separate phone calls. One went to her landlord, one went to her employer at the Sahara Tahoe. In both calls, the man identified himself as someone relaying a message on Donna's behalf. He said she'd had a family emergency. He said she wouldn't be coming back. Not to the apartment, not to the job, not right away. Now, on its face, that's actually a plausible story. Think about the world this was happening in. A transient resort economy, full of young workers who came and went without much ceremony. In 1970s, Tahoe, a worker abruptly leaving town without much notice, wasn't unheard of at all. People skipped out on leases. People left jobs without 2 weeks' notice. So for a stretch of days, maybe even a couple of weeks, that explanation may have genuinely been enough to quiet any immediate alarm among the people who would otherwise have started asking questions much sooner. But it wasn't true. There was no family emergency. Nobody back in South Dakota had called her home, and nobody there had heard from Donna either. Whoever made those calls had to have known her well enough to know her employer's number and her landlord's number, or at least well enough to find them. That's not the kind of detail a random stranger picks up by accident. It implies access. It implies, at minimum, that someone close enough to her life knew exactly which 2 phone numbers would matter most in delaying a search. The calls were, in the most literal sense possible, a deliberately constructed cover story. Someone, and we still don't know who, wanted the people closest to Donna Lass to stop looking for her. Her landlord, who'd otherwise notice an empty apartment sitting there, month after month, the mail piling up, the rent eventually falling behind. Her employer, who'd otherwise notice a missed shift, then another, and start making calls of their own. It worked. For a while, it worked exactly as intended, and that delay, those lost days and weeks at the very start of the investigation, is something investigators have never, in 55 years, been able to get back. By the time Donna Lass was formally entered into the system as a missing person with South Lake Tahoe police, it was already early 1971, months, not days, after she'd actually disappeared. Her belongings sat exactly where she'd left them. Her new car sat exactly where she'd parked it outside the apartment. Her bank account was never touched again, not once, not by her, and not by anyone claiming to be her. So wherever Donna Lass went on September 6th or 7th of 1970, the evidence points overwhelmingly in one direction. She did not go there voluntarily, and whoever was behind those phone calls did not expect her to ever come back to explain herself. Chapter 3. The investigation goes cold. To understand why this case stalled as quickly and as completely as it did, it helps to understand the geography, because the geography itself was a problem, a structural one, baked right into the map. South Lake Tahoe sits on the California side of the lake inside El Dorado County. State line, where Donna Lass actually lived and worked, sits literally across the state line in Douglas County, Nevada. Sometimes only a few hundred yards separate the two. You could walk from a California parking lot into a Nevada casino without even realizing you'd crossed a state border if it weren't for the signs. The Sahara Tahoe Casino itself was a Nevada business. Her apartment was a Nevada address, but significant parts of the surrounding area and much of the regional law enforcement infrastructure investigators might have actually needed. Things like crime labs, additional manpower, broader jurisdictional reach, fell under California jurisdiction instead. 2 states, 2 counties, 2 separate police departments with 2 separate chains of command, 2 separate budgets, and 2 separate sets of institutional priorities. All of them, in effect, investigating the same case from opposite sides of an invisible line running straight through the middle of one resort town. Evidence collected on one side of that line wasn't automatically shared with the other. Leads developed by one department weren't automatically routed to the other. Even basic things, who actually had primary jurisdiction over a missing persons case when the victim worked in one state and was last definitively seen in another, could become genuinely murky questions, the kind that eat up valuable time in the early days of an investigation, when time matters most. It's exactly the kind of bureaucratic seam a case can disappear into, not necessarily through anyone's malice or even incompetence, just through the ordinary friction of multi-jurisdictional work in an era long before agencies digitally shared case files, long before there were any standardized protocols for handling a transient worker disappearance that happened to straddle the state line. Investigators worked the leads that were actually available to them. They tried to trace the 2 hoax phone calls back to a source, which was extraordinarily difficult in 1970 without modern call tracing technology, especially if the calls had been placed from a payphone. And payphones were the overwhelming norm at the time. That's just how a phone call got made if you didn't want your own line attached to it. A payphone could be anywhere, on a casino floor, outside a gas station, in a hotel lobby down the road. Without a name, without a witness who'd seen someone using it at that exact moment, that lead simply went cold almost as soon as it opened. They tried to identify the blonde man seen with Donna the day before she vanished, circulating what little description existed, which frankly wasn't much. A general build, a hair color, nothing close to what you'd need to actually narrow down a suspect pool in a town full of seasonal workers who'd scattered to who knows where by the time anyone started seriously asking questions. They interviewed co-workers at the Sahara Tahoe, people who'd crossed paths with her during her brief 4 months in town. Though 4 months isn't very long to build the kind of deep friendships that produce detailed, reliable information for investigators. And eventually, they reached out to her family back in South Dakota, 1,500 miles away, who could offer grief and worry, but very little in the way of first-hand knowledge about her new life in Nevada. None of it produced a suspect. None of it produced a body. None of it produced an answer of any kind. By the mid-1970s, the Donna Lass case had settled into a category that law enforcement in the Tahoe Basin knew all too well, a category they could never quite resolve. A presumed disappearance with strong indicators of foul play. The staged cover story. The untouched belongings. The total, absolute silence that followed. But alongside all of that, no crime scene. No recovered physical evidence of violence. No identified perpetrator to actually build a case around. It is, in the coldest, most procedural sense imaginable, exactly the kind of file that ends up in a drawer, followed up on periodically, sure, pulled out, dusted off, looked at again every few years when a new lead trickled in, but never closed and never solved. What kept the case alive in the public imagination over the following decades wasn't, at first, new evidence from the investigation itself. It was a postcard. And the postcard didn't come from anyone connected to Donna Lass at all. It came from, or at least was attributed to,
by the most notorious killer in American history. Like and subscribe.